The cold wind cut through the barren landscape, carrying with it the faint, forlorn cries of a newborn. On the outskirts of the small, isolated town, a young mother stumbled through the snow, her thin shawl barely shielding her from the biting chill. Her hands, raw and trembling from exposure, clutched tightly to her infant, whose tiny body shook against her chest. Every step she took was heavy with exhaustion, her bare shoes leaving a trail in the frozen ground, each imprint a testament to the miles she had traveled in search of something as simple and as unattainable as food. She had been wandering for hours, maybe days. Time had lost all meaning in the fog of her desperation. Her stomach ached in an annoying, relentless way, and she felt a twist in her chest as she watched her baby's pale lips quiver. She knew that her own suffering paled in comparison to the helpless child in her arms. Every weak cry from the baby pulled at the fraying threads of her heart, driving her onward despite the pain in her legs, the frostbite threatening her fingers, and the hunger that made her vision blur. She was trapped in a cruel paradox. She had life to give, but no means to sustain it. Her mind raced, searching for options, each one bleaker than the last. In the distance, the faint outline of a ranch came into view, its large wooden gates standing like an island of warmth and stability in the frozen wasteland. She approached it slowly, her body trembling not just from the cold but from the shame and fear that weighed heavily upon her. She had always believed in doing what was right, in keeping herself and her child safe through whatever meager means she could. But now, with nothing left and no way to provide for her baby, the thought of asking for help made her stomach twist with humiliation. Yet, the hunger gnawing at both of them left her no choice. As she drew closer, the sound of the wind muted, replaced by the faint creak of the ranch gate swinging in the wind. Her heart pounded violently, as if it could somehow signal to someone inside that she needed help, that her child needed saving. She called out softly at first, her voice hoarse from crying and shouting in the wind, but no one answered. Summoning the last of her courage, she stepped onto the porch, leaving footprints in the snow that would soon be covered by the drifting flakes. The door loomed before her like a threshold between despair and hope. Inside, the rancher, a man of quiet demeanor and solitary habits, noticed the movement at his gate. He observed through the window, his gaze sharpening as he took in the scene. There was something in the way the young mother held her child, a protective, desperate ferocity that told him more than words ever could. He saw the hollow cheeks, the tattered shawl, and the trembling hands. He saw a person pushed to the brink of despair, forced to confront choices no one should ever face. The mother hesitated, her lips parted as if to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Her pride wrestled with her need. Her fear warred with her love for the child. She was aware of the precariousness of her situation and of the uncertain nature of the person she was about to appeal to. Yet, exhaustion and hunger left her no choice. She had arrived at the ranch, and there, in the silent observation of the rancher, the first spark of potential salvation shimmered a chance, however small, that someone might respond not with cruelty, but with compassion. In that moment, the world seemed suspended, the cold and snow falling silently around them as the young mother stood at the doorstep, cradling her baby and facing the unknown. The story of survival, of human kindness, and of a life forever changed was about to begin, not with grand gestures or loud declarations, but with a single desperate step toward hope. The mother's trembling fingers clutched her infant tighter as she stepped closer to the heavy wooden door of the ranch. Every muscle in her body ached, yet a heavier weight pressed upon her chest, the unbearable truth that she could not keep her child fed, warm, or safe for much longer. The tiny cries of the baby, once faint and weak, grew louder, each one slicing through the cold air like a knife. She pressed the infant closer, feeling the warmth of the child's fragile body against her own diminishing warmth, but it was not enough. Hunger gnawed at both of them, twisting her stomach into knots so tight she thought she might collapse. Her lips quivered as she finally forced herself to speak, her voice almost breaking. "Please, sir, I have nothing. My baby." "We're starving," she swallowed hard, fighting back tears. Pride had been a distant memory for weeks, and now desperation drove her to an unthinkable decision. She opened her mouth again, choking on her shame and fear, and whispered words that haunted her own heart. I'll give you my child, if you will only give me some bread, just a little, just enough to keep us alive." The words hung in the icy air, heavy and impossible. She could feel the weight of them pressing on her chest, each syllable a hammer against her rib cage. She did not know if the rancher would understand, or worse, if he would reject her outright. She braced herself for anger, for ridicule, for cruelty, but she had no other option. The thought of her child suffering from hunger, of seeing the tiny body weaken day by day, left her with no room for hesitation. She had arrived at the edge of despair, and this plea, this unbearable offer, was her only lifeline. Inside the ranch, the rancher observed silently. His eyes, sharp and discerning, took in the young mother's trembling form, her ragged clothing, the hollow despair etched into every line of her face. He noticed the baby's thin arms and legs, the pale skin stretched over delicate bones, and the faint, desperate wail that seemed to echo the mother's own anguish. There was no hesitation in his gaze, only quiet attention. He did not interrupt her plea or scold her for her audacity. Instead, he allowed her words to settle, to echo in the space between them. The mother's chest heaved with sobs, the sound muffled by the baby's small head pressed against her shoulder. She felt raw, exposed, and humiliated. Yet somehow a sliver of hope persisted, hope that someone might understand that her offer was born not of cruelty or indifference, but of sheer necessity. She could see it in the rancher's steady, unwavering eyes that he recognized her torment. For the first time in weeks, she did not feel completely invisible, lost in the harsh world that had pushed her to this brink. The moment was unbearably tense. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the windows, catching in the fading light, while inside, time seemed to stretch, elongated by the unspoken weight of her words. Every second felt like an eternity. She clung to the baby, praying that the plea would not be met with rejection, that the offer, desperate as it was, would not result in further suffering. Her mind raced with possibilities. Would he turn her away? Would he take her child and leave her broken? Or could there be mercy in this quiet, stoic man who had watched her approach? In the silence that followed, the rancher made no immediate response. He studied her, felt the depth of her despair, and understood the gravity of the choice she had made in speaking those words. The plea was heartbreaking, almost unbearable in its simplicity. A mother's love weighed against survival itself. And in that frozen, fragile moment, the story pivoted on a single thread, the possibility of compassion, the potential for a life changed forever by a quiet act of mercy. The rancher remained silent, standing behind the heavy wooden window frame, his gaze fixed on the young mother as she cradled her infant. He did not speak, did not move, and yet his presence was undeniable. He watched every subtle movement, the way her shoulders sagged under the weight of exhaustion, the slight shiver that ran through her tiny frame with every gust of wind, and the careful, almost desperate way she adjusted the baby against her chest. His silence was deliberate, a quiet observation meant to fully comprehend the depth of her plight before taking any action. It was not mere curiosity that held him there. It was recognition of the fragility of life and the raw intensity of human desperation. He saw her hollow cheeks, the pale ring around her lips, the dirt ingrained in her hair and clothing. He saw the tiny hands of her baby, curled into fists, reaching instinctively toward warmth, toward safety. He noticed the hollow sound of her breathing, uneven and shallow, and the distant, almost defeated look in her eyes. This was no ordinary visitor seeking food or shelter. It was a person teetering on the brink of survival, and he could not ignore it. As he observed, the rancher felt the weight of his own solitude pressing against him. He had spent years alone in this remote place, surrounded by wealth and comfort, yet untouched by the chaos of the world outside. And now, at his doorstep, was a glimpse of that world's harsh reality. Suffering so immediate, so raw that it demanded more than passive acknowledgement. He realized that this was a moment of choice, a test of character, a call to act in a way that could alter the course of not just one life, but two. The young mother did not notice the rancher's watchful eyes. She was fully consumed by her immediate struggle, by the overwhelming need to keep her baby alive. She rocked the child gently, whispering soft, broken reassurances that her own voice seemed too weak to carry. Her pride and dignity had already been sacrificed to necessity, leaving only the raw instinct to protect, to nurture, and to survive. Each small movement, each trembling breath, was a silent testimony to her love and desperation. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old window panes and sending flurries of snow swirling into the yard. Yet inside the ranch, the air seemed still, heavy with anticipation. The rancher's silence created a space where every motion, every word from the young mother was amplified. He noted how she pressed the infant's head to her chest when she stumbled, how she shielded him from the wind as best she could, and how her eyes darted nervously toward the door, almost as if seeking reassurance that the world might still hold a shred of kindness. In that quiet, unspoken observation, he began to piece together her story not through words, but through gestures, posture, and the undeniable intensity of her gaze. He understood the impossible choices she had faced: days without food, sleepless nights, the constant fear of losing her child. He felt a deep, almost instinctive empathy stir within him. It was a recognition that life could be cruel, but also that even small acts of mercy could have monumental impact. The rancher did not yet move to intervene. Instead, he allowed himself to fully absorb the scene, to understand the depths of her desperation and the courage it took to arrive at his doorstep. This silence was not indifference. It was contemplation, a preparation to act with intention rather than impulse. He knew that any response he offered would have lasting consequences. For the young mother, the seconds stretched endlessly, each one filled with fear and uncertainty. She did not know if he would accept her plea, if he would send her away, or if he might even exploit her vulnerability. But the quiet observation at the window, the unseen acknowledgement of her suffering, was the first glimmer of hope, a promise that perhaps someone might see her not as a burden, but as a human being deserving of compassion. The rancher remained silent, neither moving toward the door nor turning away. Inside, the young mother's trembling grew more pronounced as she held her infant closer, rocking him gently to calm his cries. The cold wind whistled around the edges of the porch, rattling the wooden beams and sending icy drafts into the small space. Yet, despite the freezing air, time seemed to slow, and the world narrowed to this small, suspended moment, a fragile bubble where despair and hope met, hovering in tense equilibrium. She stood there, exhausted, frozen in both body and spirit, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. Every instinct screamed that she needed help, yet pride and fear tethered her to the porch. Her mind raced through the impossible choices she had faced that day, each more heart-wrenching than the last. She had scoured the village for food, begged strangers, and searched the snow-covered streets for scraps. Each failure had chipped away at her hope, leaving her raw and desperate. Now at the rancher's doorstep, she confronted the culmination of that hopeless journey, her plea for survival balanced on the precipice of uncertainty. Inside the ranch, the man's gaze never wavered. He studied her as she rocked the baby, noting every subtle motion, the way her shoulders tensed when the wind bit, The slight tilt of her head as she murmured comforting words to her child, the silent sobs she tried to stifle. In that silence, he could feel the weight of her desperation pressing outward, an almost tangible force that filled the space between them. He understood that this moment was more than a plea for bread. It was a silent cry for dignity, for recognition, for the basic human decency that had eluded her for far too long. The stillness was heavy, yet it was not empty. In this quiet, unspoken space, emotions carried more weight than words ever could. Fear, despair, and hope mingled in the air, a precarious mixture that demanded careful attention. The rancher realized that any sudden movement, any premature action, could shatter the delicate balance. He did not want to startle her or impose his presence too aggressively. Instead, he chose to allow her space to exist fully in her vulnerability. This stillness became a bridge, a silent communication that he was watching, understanding, and considering her situation with the gravity it deserved. The young mother, unaware of his full intentions, felt the piercing weight of the pause. She pressed the infant's face closer to her chest, inhaling the faint warmth and the soft, irregular rhythm of his breathing. Her heart ached with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She feared rejection, feared judgment, feared that her last chance for survival would be denied. Yet, within the oppressive quiet, a faint ember of hope sparked. Perhaps, she thought, someone might see her pain without judgment. Someone might respond with more than words. Someone might act with compassion. As the snow swirled around the porch and the cold seeped into her bones, she realized that the pause was not cruelty, it was intention. The rancher's silence was a careful weighing of her plight, a reflection of his own deliberation about the right course of action. He was not blind to her suffering nor unmoved. He was simply giving space for the truth of her desperation to reveal itself fully. In this suspended moment, both were caught in a quiet reckoning. She, confronting the depths of her vulnerability and the limits of human endurance, and he, observing, judging, and preparing to respond with deliberate care. The tension, the stillness, and the shared recognition of humanity created a charged atmosphere where the smallest gesture could carry monumental significance. The stage was set, poised for the first act of mercy, a moment that would alter the trajectory of two lives forever. Finally, as the wind died down and the snow settled lightly on the porch, the silence hinted at the approaching decision. In this fleeting, fragile stillness, the young mother clung to her baby with desperate hope, while the rancher, quiet and deliberate, prepared to act in a way that neither of them could have anticipated, but which would define the course of the story to come. After what felt like an eternity of silence, the rancher finally moved, but his action was quiet, deliberate, and gentle, a gesture that spoke louder than any words could. He stepped inside, carefully avoiding startling the young mother, and returned moments later carrying a small basket. Inside were simple, humble provisions: a loaf of bread, a slab of cheese, and a little jar of water. The aroma of fresh bread drifted faintly through the cold air, a warm contrast to the harsh winter chill. It was a small offering, yet it carried profound significance, a lifeline thrown across the chasm of despair. The young mother froze at the sight. Her eyes widened, disbelief mingling with a flicker of hope. She could barely comprehend that someone had not only acknowledged her presence, but had also taken the time and care to respond with generosity. Her trembling hands reached instinctively for the basket, but she hesitated, unsure whether she had the right to accept such kindness. Pride, shame, and desperation collided violently within her, each emotion demanding dominance over the other. Yet the rumble of her own empty stomach and the weak whimpers of her baby urged her forward. The rancher said nothing, maintaining a quiet distance, letting the gesture itself communicate what words could not: that she and her child were seen, their suffering acknowledged, and most importantly, that she was not alone. The unspoken message was clear: this act of kindness was unconditional. It was not transactional, not a test, nor a judgment. It was a human response to human need. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, the young mother felt a tentative sense of safety, a fragile reassurance that someone cared enough to act without expecting anything in return. Tears blurred her vision as she accepted the basket, her hands shaking so violently that she had to press the baby to her chest with one arm while holding the bread with the other. She dared a small, choked voice. I don't understand why." The rancher's silence continued, but his eyes conveyed patience, empathy, and an unwavering calm. It was as if he were saying, without speaking, that explanation was unnecessary. That for now, survival and care were enough. The simple act of providing food transformed the entire dynamic. The young mother, who had approached with trepidation and fear, began to relax slightly, her shoulders losing some of their tension, her back straightening with a hint of relief. The baby, sensing the change in his mother, quieted slightly as well, lulled by the warmth and nourishment in the basket. In this small, quiet moment, the rancher had shifted the balance of power, not through force or authority, but through compassion. She could feel it in the way he allowed her to take the lead, in the patient stillness that accompanied his generosity. There was no rush, no expectation, no hidden motives, only a willingness to offer sustenance, warmth, and protection. It was a profound lesson in the language of human kindness, that sometimes silence paired with action speaks more loudly than words ever could. As the mother took her first tentative bites of the bread, she realized the enormity of what had happened. This gesture, small as it seemed, was more than nourishment. It was validation of her worth, an acknowledgement that she and her child deserved care and protection, not judgment or exploitation. It was the first step in a chain of events that would eventually restore not only their physical well-being, but also their sense of dignity, hope, and possibility. The rancher's act of kindness, unannounced and unspoken, set the tone for the days to come. It was a signal that his home was a safe place, a haven from the harshness of the outside world, and that perhaps for the first time in a long while survival could be possible without sacrifice of her child. In that quiet winter morning, as snow drifted softly around the porch, the young mother felt a flicker of hope, a fragile, precious spark that could grow into something enduring. After witnessing the young mother's relief at the small meal, the rancher took a slow, deliberate step forward and opened the heavy door wider, gesturing toward the warmth of his home. The interior was simple but inviting. A roaring fireplace cast flickering shadows across wooden walls, the scent of clean linen and fresh hay mingling with the lingering aroma of the bread he had offered. The mother hesitated at the threshold, clutching her baby tightly, unsure whether she could trust the generosity she had been shown. Her pride warred with her desperation, but hunger, exhaustion, and the soft warmth spilling from the house beckoned her forward. The rancher said nothing. He did not command her to enter, nor did he pressure her in any way. His silence was patient and respectful, allowing her to make the choice herself. This quiet deference carried a profound message, that she was not being forced, judged, or taken advantage of. In that moment, the young mother realized that the offer was genuine. She could step inside, let herself breathe for the first time in weeks, and provide her child with shelter and warmth, a small yet monumental relief. Tentatively, she crossed the threshold, her bare feet cold against the smooth wooden floor. Every step was careful, each one measured by the fragility of her body and the delicate balance of her baby in her arms. The infant stirred at the sudden change in environment, tiny fingers gripping her neck, but the warmth of the room seemed to soothe him slightly. She felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was safety here, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to imagine a reprieve from the unrelenting fear that had plagued her. The rancher guided her gently toward a small chair by the fireplace, offering a blanket to drape over her shivering shoulders. She accepted it hesitantly, feeling the comforting weight of the thick fabric and the heat of the fire radiating against her chilled skin. As she sat, rocking the baby and feeding him the small morsels of bread he eagerly devoured, she began to relax ever so slightly. For the first time, she could feel her body release the tension that had been coiled tight for days. She could breathe without the constant gnawing anxiety of where her next meal would come from. As she rested, the rancher moved quietly about the room, preparing a simple basin of warm water and a clean cloth. He did not impose, did not hover, but left the items where she could use them when she was ready. There was no rush, no questions, no judgment, only a gentle, steady presence that silently communicated safety, respect, and consideration. Each small action reinforced the unspoken promise that she and her child were valued, that their lives mattered, and that they were welcome in this space. The young mother's eyes filled with tears, not from shame this time, but from relief and gratitude. Her body, once tight with fear and exhaustion, began to soften. She allowed herself to acknowledge that the rancher's offer of shelter was more than just a roof over their heads. It was an opportunity to regain strength, dignity, and hope. In his quiet way, he was providing her with the means to care for her child, to reclaim the sense of agency that had been stripped away by starvation and desperation. The baby, now calmer in the warmth of the blanket and the mother's arms, nestled against her chest, and she realized how heavy the burden of worry had been. Here, in the safety of the ranch, she could finally rest, even briefly, and regain the energy to face the challenges ahead. The rancher's silent but unwavering support created a sanctuary where she could rebuild herself and protect her child. In that moment, the story took a subtle yet profound turn. The young mother's arrival at the doorstep had begun as an act of desperation, a plea born of fear and hunger. Now, through the rancher's patient observation, small acts of kindness, and offer of shelter, she had crossed the threshold into hope. For both mother and child, this was more than warmth. It was the first step toward survival, dignity, and perhaps a life renewed. In the days following her arrival at the ranch, the young mother began to experience a quiet transformation. At first, every interaction with the rancher was cautious, tentative, measured. She had been betrayed before, abandoned by those she had trusted, and the raw vulnerability of her current situation made her wary of extending her trust too quickly. Yet, in small, deliberate ways, the rancher continued to show her that his kindness was genuine. There were no sudden movements, no overwhelming demands, no intrusive questions, only steady, quiet support that allowed her to regain a sense of control over her life. Each morning, he provided a simple breakfast, ensuring that both she and the baby were nourished. The routine was understated, yet it carried profound significance. He did not force her to accept the food, nor did he demand gratitude. He simply offered sustenance, creating a small, consistent space in which she could begin to recover. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, she experienced the feeling of stability. She began to anticipate these small gestures, not out of dependency, but as a recognition that here, in this place, she was seen and valued. The rancher also offered practical assistance. He brought clean clothing for both her and the baby, and encouraged her to wash the grime and dirt from their bodies with warm water. It was not done with condescension, but with the quiet respect of someone who understood that dignity was as important as nourishment. Each item, each act, was a building block in reconstructing her fragile sense of self. She began to recognize that the care being extended to her was not conditional or transactional, but rooted in empathy. Slowly, she started to engage in conversation, her voice still soft and hesitant, but growing stronger each day. She spoke of her journey, of the hardships she had endured, and of the fears that had driven her to the ranch that first snowy morning. The rancher listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging, allowing her words to flow freely. It was in this quiet listening that trust began to form. She realized that he valued her narrative, that he acknowledged her struggles without diminishing them. This recognition was transformative. It validated her experiences and allowed her to feel seen not just as a desperate mother, but as a person with a story worth hearing. Small acts of connection began to take shape naturally. She found herself smiling at his quiet humor, noticing the subtle ways he attended to the ranch and the animals under his care. He encouraged her to move at her own pace, to participate in small chores if she wished, but never forced her. The autonomy he allowed her reinforced her sense of agency and slowly eroded the fear and suspicion she had brought with her. Trust, she realized, was not demanded, it was nurtured through consistent, thoughtful action. Even the baby responded to this growing trust. With each passing day, his cries grew softer and less frantic. He began to settle more quickly in her arms, lulled not only by the warmth of the home but also by the calm, steady presence of the rancher. It was clear that the infant, sensing the safety and security in this environment, was slowly learning to feel protected, a reflection of the trust his mother was beginning to extend. By the end of the week, the young mother felt a subtle but profound shift within herself. The fear and desperation that had defined her existence were no longer as overpowering. In their place, there was cautious hope, the tentative belief that her child and she could survive, and perhaps even thrive under the protection of the rancher's care. Trust was not yet complete, but the small steps taken, gentle gestures, quiet patience, and consistent support had laid a foundation that could grow into something enduring. In these seemingly mundane interactions, sharing a meal, preparing for the day, quietly observing each other, the bonds of human connection began to form. It was a reminder that trust, like love, often grows not through grand declarations, but through small, deliberate acts that signal care, empathy, and respect. And in this fragile, cautious trust, the seeds of hope for the young mother and her child were taking root, ready to blossom in the days to come. As the days turned into weeks, the young mother and the rancher began to share a quiet, unspoken understanding that slowly deepened into a genuine connection. The trust established through small, deliberate gestures had created fertile ground for something more profound, a bond not built on necessity alone, but on mutual recognition of humanity and the shared weight of past struggles. Each interaction, however simple, became a thread weaving them together in ways neither had anticipated. The young mother, once timid and hesitant, began to speak more freely. She shared fragments of her life before desperation drove her to the ranch, the joys and sorrows, the moments of love and loss, and the relentless challenges she faced as a single parent. In her stories, the rancher saw resilience, courage, and a tenderness that had survived even in the harshest of circumstances. He listened, not merely as a passive observer, but as someone genuinely interested, offering the occasional nod or soft word of encouragement. His quiet presence allowed her to open herself without fear of judgment, creating a safe space where her voice mattered. In turn, the rancher began to reveal glimpses of his own life. He spoke cautiously, revealing only small truths, at first memories of isolation, of loss, and of the burdens he carried silently in his heart. His words were measured, each one carefully chosen, but the young mother could sense the depth behind them. She realized that his stoic exterior masked a man who had felt loneliness and hardship as deeply as she had, and this understanding drew them closer. It was the recognition of shared vulnerability that formed the cornerstone of their connection. Two wounded souls finding solace in the quiet presence of the other. Their bond extended beyond conversation. Daily routines, once solitary and mundane, became shared experiences that fostered companionship. She assisted with simple chores around the ranch, gradually gaining confidence in her ability to contribute and regain agency over her life. The rancher, in turn, offered guidance without patronizing her, encouraging independence while providing steady support. These moments of collaboration, small yet significant, allowed mutual respect to grow alongside the budding trust. The infant, too, became a bridge between them. The rancher would sit beside her as she fed the child, sometimes cradling him in his own arms, observing the gentle rhythm of mother and baby. Each smile from the infant, each small gesture of recognition, seemed to strengthen the bond between the adults. The young mother noticed the soft, protective way he interacted with her child, and the sight stirred a profound sense of gratitude and warmth. In witnessing his care, she began to feel that their connection was more than circumstance. It was rooted in genuine concern and affection. Laughter, once foreign to the young mother's lips in recent months, began to return in small doses. The rancher's quiet humor, his ability to find light in mundane moments, elicited smiles and occasional chuckles. These simple exchanges became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, that even amidst suffering, connections could form that allowed joy, however fleeting, to resurface. Through shared experiences, empathy, and consistent kindness, the young mother's fear gradually diminished, replaced by a sense of security and belonging. She no longer approached the ranch merely as a refuge. She began to see it as a place where her child could thrive and where she herself could rebuild strength and hope. And in observing her resilience, the rancher's admiration and care for her deepened, his initial compassion evolving into a profound respect and affection. By the end of this chapter of their lives, the connection between them was undeniable. It was a bond forged in the fires of desperation, nurtured through patient understanding, and solidified through acts of shared humanity. It was no longer solely about survival, it had become about companionship, trust, and the quiet emergence of love that promised to guide both mother and child toward a brighter, more secure future. By now, the young mother and her baby had settled into the rhythms of life at the ranch, yet the transformation went far beyond mere physical survival. The gentle, consistent care provided by the rancher had begun to reshape not only their daily lives, but also their emotional landscapes. The young mother, once fragile and trembling under the weight of desperation, now moved with cautious confidence, her posture steadier, her eyes carrying a spark of determination that had been absent for months. She was learning, slowly but surely, to reclaim the sense of agency that starvation, fear, and despair had stolen from her. The rancher's presence continued to serve as both a guide and a quiet support. He provided her with tools, knowledge, and gentle instruction, enabling her to care for herself and her child more effectively. Whether it was tending to the small garden, learning to prepare meals, or managing the basic tasks of daily life on the ranch, each small victory reinforced her belief in her own strength. The baby, nourished and thriving in the safety of his mother's arms, became a living testament to the positive impact of these consistent, compassionate interventions. Each smile, each coo, each tiny milestone reminded the mother and the rancher that life could be nurtured back from the brink of despair. Yet the transformation was not merely practical. It was profoundly emotional. The young mother's trust, once fragile, had deepened into a quiet, abiding confidence in the rancher's integrity and kindness. She no longer approached him with trepidation or fear. Instead, she began to see him as a steadfast presence in her life, someone whose support was reliable and whose intentions were sincere. This trust allowed her to shed layers of anxiety and shame, replacing them with hope and a tentative sense of joy. She began to laugh more freely, to speak openly, and to dream not extravagantly, but with the cautious optimism of someone who has survived the worst and now sees the possibility of better days. For the rancher, the transformation was equally profound. What began as an act of quiet compassion grew into a personal investment in their well-being. He had provided food and shelter, but over time he came to recognize the depth of his attachment to both mother and child. The bond he felt was no longer a simple act of charity. It had evolved into a genuine commitment, a desire to see their lives flourish. He took satisfaction in witnessing the baby's growth, the mother's increasing confidence, and the quiet, reciprocal affection that blossomed between them. In helping them rebuild their lives, he was quietly transforming his own existence as well, discovering the meaning of purpose, connection, and emotional fulfillment that had long been absent from his solitary life. The transformation extended to the very fabric of daily life on the ranch. The once lonely home was now filled with laughter, the soft cries and coos of a thriving infant, and the warmth of human connection. Shared meals, quiet conversations, and small routines of care became rituals that reinforced their sense of belonging. The rancher's stoic demeanor softened in response to their presence, revealing glimpses of a heart that had long been shielded by solitude. The young mother, in turn, discovered her own capacity for resilience, love, and gratitude, realizing that even in moments of profound despair, new life and hope could emerge. By the end of this chapter, the lives of all three had been irrevocably altered. The baby, once at risk of suffering and neglect, now thrived under the steady care of his mother and the protective watch of the rancher. The young mother, once desperate and broken, had regained her dignity, confidence, and sense of purpose. And the rancher, once solitary and closed off, had opened his heart to compassion, empathy, and human connection. Through a series of small, deliberate acts of kindness, observation, and patient nurturing, their lives had been transformed, not just saved, but enriched, imbued with hope, and connected by bonds that promised a future brighter than their troubled pasts. Winter had begun to loosen its grip on the land, the harsh wind softening and the snow melting into small streams that glistened in the pale sunlight. The young mother, once fragile and desperate, now moved through the ranch with a quiet confidence, her every step carrying the resilience she had regained. The baby, healthy and vibrant, cooed and giggled as he explored his surroundings, his small hands reaching for anything that caught his curiosity. The ranch, once a quiet and lonely place, had transformed into a haven filled with warmth, laughter, and hope, a reflection of the changes that had taken place in the hearts of its inhabitants. The young mother had reclaimed her sense of dignity. No longer consumed by fear, shame, or the gnawing anxiety of survival, she could now think, plan, and dream for herself and her child. Each day brought new challenges, but she faced them with a quiet courage and determination that had been nurtured through the rancher as patient guidance. She had learned to provide for her child, to make choices with confidence, and to trust in the kindness of another human being. These skills were more than survival tools, they were symbols of her rebirth, a reclaiming of her identity that had been nearly lost to despair. The rancher, too, had undergone a transformation. What had begun as a series of silent acts of compassion had blossomed into a profound emotional connection. The once reclusive man had opened his home and heart to the young mother and her child, discovering in the process the depth of human empathy and the fulfillment of nurturing others. His life, once defined by solitude, now held meaning and purpose that went far beyond the boundaries of his ranch. He had given safety and stability, but in return, he received companionship, gratitude, and the quiet joys of witnessing the restoration of a family. The relationship between the three became a delicate tapestry of trust, love, and mutual respect. The baby thrived as the center of this bond, his presence a constant reminder of life's fragility and resilience. Each laugh, each milestone, and each tender moment shared between mother and child strengthened the connection to the rancher, who in turn provided a model of patience, reliability, and quiet strength. Together they had formed a family, not by obligation or circumstance, but by choice, care, and the shared experience of survival and compassion. This period of growth and healing also brought a sense of redemption. The young mother, once ready to sacrifice her child for survival, now found herself in a place where such a choice was no longer necessary. Her value as a mother and as a human being had been recognized and affirmed. She had been given back her worth not through charity alone, but through the consistent demonstration that she and her child deserved love, care, and protection. The rancher, too, experienced redemption of a sort, finding in his acts of kindness and protection a pathway to emotional healing and purpose that solitude had never afforded him. Spring approached, and with it, the promise of new beginnings. The young mother envisioned a future where she could provide not only for her child's physical needs but also for his emotional and spiritual growth. The rancher, witnessing her newfound strength, felt a quiet pride and satisfaction that words could not capture. Together, they faced the future with hope rather than fear, with plans rather than despair, and with the certainty that they had weathered the harshest of storms to emerge stronger, united, and whole. In the final moments of this chapter, the sun broke through the clouds, casting warm golden light over the ranch. The snow had melted, revealing the earth beneath, fertile and ready for new life. The young mother held her child close, the baby's laughter echoing through the fields, while the rancher stood nearby, a quiet guardian of this newfound family. Their journey, born of desperation and hardship, had led them to a place of healing, redemption, and the promise of a future shaped by love, trust, and the enduring power of human compassion. The story concluded not with an end, but with a beginning, a testament to resilience, to the transformative power of kindness, and to the undeniable truth that even in the darkest moments, new life and hope could emerge, strong and unwavering.